When we think about international trade, it is tempting to picture digital spreadsheets or billions of dollars moving across a screen. But at its core, trade is violently physical. It is millions of tons of steel, grain, and machinery crossing the ocean to swap places with someone else's resources. To understand how economists measure who is actually winning in this massive exchange, we have to strip away the money. Imagine a basic historical baseline. A country trades 50 kilograms of its own wheat to acquire 100 kilograms of foreign coffee. Looking at our foundational economics text, we see this exact example isolated in the middle of the page. It reduces trade to pure barter, 50 units out, 100 units in. This physical rate of exchange is known as the terms of trade. It dictates exactly how much of a country's exports must be shipped out to acquire a single unit of foreign imports. Calculating this ratio allows us to see past the movement of goods and determine mathematically which nation is extracting the most wealth from the exchange. You might assume that calculating this ratio is a straightforward arithmetic problem. Economists have spent decades relentlessly modifying a single mathematical framework, desperately trying to pin down a highly elusive concept, a nation's true economic welfare. This diagram illustrates that historical evolution. We start with a simple two-variable fraction on the left. As history progresses, new variables are continuously stacked onto the equation, transforming it into a dense, multivariable algebraic string. To accurately understand global trade, we have to pull this complex string apart and break it down, variable by variable, starting from the original baseline. The addition of each new variable marks a point where economists realized their previous measurements were failing to capture the full picture of a nation's growth. The starting point for modern trade measurement is called the net barter terms of trade. This page shows the foundational formula. TC equals PX divided by PM multiplied by 100. PX is the export price index, and PM is the import price index. This equation strictly measures relative prices on paper, completely ignoring the physical reality at the shipping ports. This creates an immediate problem. What happens if a country's export prices are exceptionally high on the global market, but they do not actually sell any volume of those goods? Having a highly favorable price ratio is mathematically useless if the country lacks the physical volume of trade necessary to sustain its economy. To solve this volume problem, Professor F. W. Taussig introduced a new framework in 1927. Notice the shift in this new equation, the gross barter terms of trade. Taussig completely stripped out the price tax. Instead, he used QM to represent the physical quantity of imports and QX for the physical quantity of exports. But measuring raw physical tonnage creates its own blind spot. It ignores a nation's actual financial capacity to afford those imports over a sustained period. That blind spot was addressed in 1948 by G.S. Dorrance, who developed a crucial metric for developing nations known as the income terms of trade. Dorrance addressed this by taking the original price index ratio and multiplying it by the total physical volume of exports, the variable QX. This new formula calculates a country's purchasing power, modeling their true capacity to import. For developing economies, survival is rarely dictated by the high price of a single specialty good. It depends heavily on the sheer volume they can output to generate enough cash to buy foreign necessities. Now, consider a paradox that breaks all of the previous models. Imagine a scenario where a country's export prices drastically drop on the global market. Standard formulas dictate their economy is losing. But what if that price drop is driven by a massive, highly efficient technological leap inside their factories? The economist Jacob Viner realized that the existing formulas completely ignored this domestic factory productivity. Viner corrected this by introducing the single factorial terms of trade. He added the variable fx for domestic productivity, which mathematically overrides a dropping export price. Below that, the double factorial formula introduces FM, directly comparing our efficiency against our trading partners' efficiency. Viner proved that true national wealth is measured by internal industrial efficiency. A nation outputting cheaper exports might not be failing at all. They might be displaying absolute economic dominance. The equations can be pushed even further, past the steel of the factories. Ultimately, a nation is trading the physical exhaustion and daily toil of its labor force. This is Weiner's attempt to mathematically quantify that human sacrifice, known as the real cost terms of trade. The new variable here is Rx. It represents the actual painful physical cost and labor required to produce exported goods. The math reaches its absolute peak of abstraction with one final attempt to measure the sheer happiness gained from trade. The utility terms of trade pushes the formula to its limit. Look specifically at the variable This is an index attempting to measure the subjective utility, the psychological satisfaction, of the imports a country receives. The textbook itself acknowledges a Stork limitation here. These final variables are purely theoretical abstractions. Economics ultimately hits a hard wall where human feelings simply cannot be objectively quantified on a spreadsheet. We have traced a complex intellectual journey, starting from measuring simple price tags to tracking shipping volumes, measuring factory output, and finally attempting to quantify human happiness. This graph illustrates the ultimate trade-off in economic measurement. We have theoretical perfection on the x-axis and practical applicability on the y-axis. The net barter and income models sit high up on the y-axis. They are mathematically flawed, but they use accessible data, making them practical enough for statistical agencies to actually use. Meanwhile, utility and double factorial sit far out on the x-axis. They are theoretically flawless concepts that are practically impossible to calculate in the real world. Yet a final mystery remains. These complex formulas only measure the resulting data of trade. They measure the prices after they are set. But what invisible force decides those prices in the first place? The 19th century economist John Stuart Mill provided the answer with his theory of reciprocal demand. Mill's insight suggests that while math reveals the final outcome of an exchange, the actual prices are determined by the competing psychological needs of the trading nations.